and welcome to the SAF Magazine podcast. I am your host, Anna Simet, and on this episode, we'll be chatting everything Oleo-X. Today, we have with us JP Ruggles and Andre Ditsch, who are both technical advisors at the company. Andre and JP, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So I think let's begin having you two tell our listeners about what is it that Oleo-X does?
Sure. Oleo-X is really a one-of-a-kind company right now that bridges basically, products that come from the ag world that were not suitable before to be processed in the oil world to make renewable fuels. We've come up with a technology that allows us to take some of the most difficult feedstocks in the world, clean them up, and get them to a place where they can be drop-in ready with existing infrastructure within the oil refining world. So basically, we take really, in some ways, disgusting feeds, things that come from the floor of a chicken processing plant, and we clean it up so that it looks like a synthetic oil. And then an oil refiner can take that and they can do it at scale. And they can put it through an existing unit and turn it into something that you wouldn't know is any different at all from renewable diesel or sustainable aviation fuel.
Really cool. So you've said that Oleo-X's chemical processing and technical production is highly differentiated, and the two of you developed it. So technically, what sets Oleo-X apart from the other players in the industry?
Yeah, so I think here there's a couple of things going on, and I think the starting point is where we're trying to end, which is flexibility. So to do what JP had just mentioned, you have to be able to accept a very wide range of feedstocks that have very different contaminants that you have to get rid of and do that all in the same facility. So you have to have a lot of flexibility in how you process that feedstock. But additionally, not every refinery is the same, and so the product, kind of the specs, are something that are very flexible as well. So the ability to get very, very low metals and such in all of our feedstocks, but also to kind of tailor the other contaminants to the metallurgy and other things that are at the refinery. So that flexibility is what really was the goal and what sets it apart. And the way we do that is by having complementary chemistry steps that you'll have multiple levers that are useful on each of the different contaminants. And so if you were building a facility for one single feedstock, you might only have one lever because it's the most efficient one. And, if you're not dealing with the really difficult feedstocks, that one lever may be sufficient. But being able to have multiple different levers and also being able to have the ability to process widely varying amounts of byproducts. So some feedstocks may have 10% waste, some feedstocks may have 0.1%. And so being able to handle all that. And the way we do that is with some certain levels of redundancy and oversizing of the byproduct stream. And that's made possible by us reusing existing infrastructure. So rather than building this thing from scratch, we're reusing a lot of existing equipment. And so we can go larger and more complex without that increasing the cost of the process. And now being able to use that equipment means that we have to do some creative technical fixes and creative chemistry, but it allows us to then take in any feedstock that somebody brings us. And if a refiner has a very specific spec, we can hit that by having those complementary levers.
Really interesting. So, what kind of challenges are the renewable diesel and SAF industries facing right now, and how is your company solving these problems?
Well, I would say that at the highest level, nature is very messy. So what you see out there in the world of renewable feedstocks is that there's a lot of different types of feeds. And as Andre was just saying a minute ago, they all come with kind of like their own flaws. And what we have as a legacy is a very large edible oil industry that's been around 150 years. And, it's perfectly competent as an industry. When you go buy a bottle of Wesson oil at Walmart, you expect a really clean and quality product. And what Andre was getting at here is that if you do that with the same soybean feed over and over and over again, you end up with a highly specialized plant that is very capable, but it can't turn left, it can't turn right. And, it would be terrible if you put a different type of oil into that. So what we've seen in the renewable diesel and SAF space is that everybody has run out and built capacity. The incentives were very big, the financial incentives, the market incentives. It's a profitable business to be in. But we've built so much capacity that unless we're planning to take every single bottle of Wesson oil off of every Walmart and equivalent around the world off the shelf and turn it into fuel, it doesn't really work without the layer that we've put in here that allows new feedstocks to come in, especially non-edible oils to come in that, they're difficult to process. So the original adventure into this space was done by a company that was a joint venture of Tyson and Centrolium about 10 years ago. And very intelligent people worked on this. They put a lot of money into it. They tried to do poultry fat and some other very difficult oils. And unfortunately, the plant ended up burning down, I think about a year into it, because they just couldn't get all the contaminants out. And some of these contaminants are like heat-seeking missiles. They will crack your metal when it's at high temperature. They will destroy your catalyst. They will foul things up. And really what we've focused on is being able to remove all of the, crazy things that nature, all these imperfections that nature puts in as contaminants, so at the end, our oil looks just like soybean oil. It doesn't matter if it starts as rendered poultry fat or pork fat or, some new cover crop that's going to come into the market. At the end, it's a super clean, zero metals, triglyceride type feed that can be put into practically anything out there that could handle soybean oil. And that's really the magic of what this is. And, I like the question you asked a lot, because we're specifically trying to solve a problem out there that there's not enough oil to just feed already what we have out there in renewable diesel and SAF conversion capacity. And there's no choice. The market has to go this route.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. So can one or both of you discuss the future potential of non-food feedstocks?
Sure. And I think this links to what JP had just mentioned, is that to meet the requirements that the aviation industry has for SAF and that, renewable diesel to meet LCFS requirements and others, the volumes have to grow dramatically. So even with some of the waste we're looking at now, that's going to eventually start hitting a wall. And so there's a lot of different opportunities, things like algal oil or different crops that make an oil that may not be the best from a food standpoint, but make something that's, high yield. And, even looking at things like waste products like pyrolysis oils and others like that, there's a lot of things out there. And one of the challenges in the industry for any of those sort of new technologies is you have three requirements. You have kind of cost, volume, and quality. And so meeting all three of those is just extremely challenging. And what we're trying to do is release one of those constraints. As long as it's largely oil-based and is something that has enough in there that can be converted into renewable diesel, we'll take care of the quality issues and kind of remove the contaminants and get rid of the things that you don't want, and let the innovators in that space focus on volumes and prices, which is going to be necessary. And so who's going to do that? There's probably others that you've talked to on podcasts that have much better views on some of those products, but whatever they happen to be, we can help take that to the quality that it goes smoothly into that existing refining infrastructure.
Okay. How much feedstock can Oleo-X's facility produce, and how does that compare to an average facility?
Right now, Oleo-X is able to process about 10,000 barrels a day. 10,000 barrels a day is oil speak. If we put it into renewable speak, I guess that's 420,000 gallons a day. But we're growing to about 1 million gallons a day, which is, significant. That would make us definitely the largest merchant pretreat plant in the world. But it's equivalent to about a small refinery, oil refinery, something big enough to run an entire city. So it adds up pretty fast.
So what about Oleo-X's end product? What are your end customers getting versus what else is on the market?
Well, they get a product that is significantly better for them to convert. It uses less hydrogen. It will cause less operational instability inside their plant. So ultimately, it's safer. And something that's safer, ultimately leads to higher uptime, better efficiency. And it's something that's drop-in ready. So one of the limits that we've seen out there for how much renewable diesel conversion capacity is willing to come online is obviously feedstock pool, but second to that is the cost. So if you have to build a unit, especially changing the metallurgy to be able to accommodate different things that come from nature, it can be very expensive. On the order of $500 million to do a conversion of an existing hydrotreater to be a renewable diesel plant within the structure of an existing refinery. With our product, especially when it's as clean as it is, and we remove, the organic chlorides and other things that cause issues for processing. You can do this really with just a catalyst change out and some minor modifications to your acid gas handling system, your dewatering system. So you're talking about 1/10 the cost, roughly, maybe 1/5 the cost for conversion. And what is really exciting about that is if you want to make, a bigger impact on the world and go after decarbonization of transport fuels, you really do need the existing oil refiners in the world to basically take one of their 10 units from each plant and convert it over and do it cheaply and do it fast, because as long as we can feed them, they will do it. Trust me, they're not pushing back on this. They want to go do that. And you can have a really big impact very quickly. So I think this scales much faster than a lot of the other technologies that are out there, because we're basically following existing paths that exist out there instead of trying to do 5-year, 10-year lead time, giant projects. These are more evolutionary than revolutionary. And the carbon impact is pretty dramatic. We're talking about up to 80% reduction in carbon emissions for our fuels versus baseline.
Interesting. So how did Oleo-X design its product to be compatible with the existing oil refining world?
Yeah, so I think both of us came from refining, either selling in products into refining or running refineries or consulting for refineries throughout our careers. So we're well aware of both the technical capabilities of a refinery and how flexible they can be, but also how risk averse they tend to be with certain areas, and for very, very good reason, because they are incredibly complex, difficult facilities to run. So understanding, particularly from a hydrotreating world, what are the contaminants that can cause issues with either metallurgy or with catalysts. And so starting from kind of, this is a requirement. If you can't drop it into a refinery and have a refinery manager excited to see this product instead of scared of it, then we haven't solved the problem. And so that's really where the company started. And then the second step was, okay, now we see that that's necessary. What's the easiest way to get there? And how do we leverage existing assets and use known chemistry, but using it in a creative way to be able to pull those levers and get to those really, really tight specs on certain things like certain metals. Then from that process, kind of those first two steps of what's out there in the refining infrastructure and what's out there to retrofit, and then being very creative in the chemistry to figure out how to best use those. And so it's really, starting from the refining world and then working our ways backward, and then, leaving enough flexibility that when we see a new oil feedstock, we have the levers to pull, so that when we have to learn how to process something new, we have the tools necessary.
Okay, you guys, as our final question, who is this a win for and why?
I think it's a major win for different feedstocks that before were really kind of given to low value. So poultry, for example, about 45% of the world's rendered poultry. And if I broke down a chicken, 75% of it's cut up for meat. A few percent is turned into protein meal and other things. But at the end, you end up with about 7-8% of that chicken that's a liquid fat. And nobody has really wanted that outside of pet food makers. And there's only so many pets in the world, right? So you're not going to sell it all to pet food makers. So 45-50% of that oil ends up going back into chicken feed. And, we have a joke that we're kind of ending, chicken on chicken cannibalism here. You actually can take that oil, for example, and turn it into a renewable diesel feedstock. So it's never really been done at scale before. We're very successful in doing that. And so that's a big win for, ultimately, people who raise chickens and people in the chicken supply chain, because it's a higher value outlet, obviously, than feeding it back to chickens. But this is also a template. And the chemistry that Andre has invented here is really, the flexibility that exists in the system is pretty amazing. So I think anybody who has a feedstock that is oily, that has been told by the refining industry that, it's too risky to take your product in here, we can't really clean this up, I would say this is a big win for them, because we can definitely tailor chemistry and design a process to basically get almost anything in the world that's an oil into the refining system. And, ultimately, the other big winner is existing refiners, and there's about 600 refineries in the world. They don't have to go throw away, $1 billion to $10 billion type plants. There's a way for them to evolve using what they know and using equipment that they've built that is very efficient. It's run very well. It's a difficult industry. There's a lot of very, very smart people who've, dedicated their lives to being good refiners. It's a way for them to greenify without having to throw away what they've done. And ultimately, for society, impact matters, right? Brilliant ideas are nice, but things that are not practical or too far off into the future don't help us on decarbonization today. So this is something that, it's sort of like the ultimate recycling goal, to take things that you're throwing away or you didn't think were valuable and then turn it into something that actually has a tremendous, like I said, 80% potential reduction on carbon emissions, and to do that through existing pathways that are already at scale and don't need massive investment. It's a way to speed things up.
Absolutely. Great answer. JP, Andre, it's time to wrap things up. I want to thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and telling our listeners more about Oleo-X. And it's been really interesting, and we sure look forward to watching what you guys do.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You bet. And to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back soon. Until next time.